Hi, good day, everyone. Welcome to the World Species Congress, the first ever species congress organized by Reverse the Rate and IUCN. To celebrate this, we are organizing a series of species-focused panel discussion. The theme of these events are Beyond Talk, transforming ideas into impactful local interventions. Who we are from the course Wetland Ecology, Biodiversity and Conservation, a 6-month course given by IUCN SSC Freshwater Conservation Committee and the Fishing Cat Project. So I'm Wu from Malaysia. I'm one of the participants of the course. Today, the spotlight is on the hairy-nosed otter. We are all gathered here to contribute to the hairy-nosed otter conservation in Southeast Asia. In today's discussion, we hope to answer an important question: the rare and threatened hairy-nosed otter as a flagship species of peat swamp in Southeast Asia. So today, we are very delightful to be joined by two panelists, two experts on hairy-nosed otter from Vietnam, Russell Gray and also Nguyen from Vietnam Wildlife. Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
uh, thank you for the introduction. So I'm Huyền Nguyen. I'm the manager of Conservation Research Department of State Vietnam Wildlife. And yeah, next to you, Rochelle.
Yeah, and I'm Russell Gray. I am the science advisor. I also work with the Conservation Research Department of State Vietnam's Wildlife. Thanks for having us.
Great. Yeah, it was great. Before that we have a session to know some of the hairy-nosed otter situation in Malaysia. Hopefully, now we will get more information and more interesting things from you all from Vietnam. So probably at first, tell us briefly about your organization and probably some of your works on the hairy-nosed otters in Vietnam.
Do you want me to take that, or
Yeah.
you? Okay.
Go ahead.
So just as a general overview, our organization, Save Vietnam's Wildlife, is a local or national nonprofit. We work primarily with small carnivores and pangolins. We have 2 rescue centers that we support and operate, one in Phuc Phuong National Park in Ninh Bình Province and one in Pumat National Park in Province. So when we rescue animals, we rehabilitate them and then we send them back to the wild. But in Vietnam, we have to make sure that they are safe whenever they're released back into the wild. So we started an initiative to install anti-poaching teams to support government rangers and to support managers to remove snares and support with anti-poaching mechanisms such as using the spatial monitoring and reporting tool, otherwise known as SMART. So we release the animals, we protect the sites, and then we monitor the animals with our conservation research team that Ian and I both work with. So we do post-release monitoring, we do large-scale camera trapping projects, biodiversity inventories, radio telemetry, all the ecological methodologies that are normal in conservation research. In regards to hairy-nosed otters, we work in 2 wetland protected areas in the south, U Minh Thượng and U Minh Hạ. These 2 protected areas are located in both the edge of the mangrove ecoregion and also primarily in the peat swamp forest ecoregion. Both parks have a mixture of Melaleuca forests as the core, just in the elevated areas, and they're surrounded entirely by peat swamp forests and habitat types. So these 2 areas are the only protected areas in Vietnam that are known to have the remaining populations of hairy-nosed otters. And so when we started with those protected areas, we were trying to monitor fishing cat, hairy-nosed otter as priority species, and also pangolin because they occur there.
Well, that's great. There's a lot of works that you have done, and I've been following as well Save Vietnam Wildlife for quite some time and see a lot of great work, especially on the rescue and rehab and parts. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you have done, especially on a lot of research methods as well that you have deployed. So probably we will touch a bit on that because just now when we talked with Prof. Azlan, we think that research is probably the first challenge here in terms of studying hairy-nosed otter. And that's why that's contribute to actually very little information about this hairy-nosed otter. Well, the second question here, probably, well, what is the status of hairy-nosed otter in your country currently? Like, how well are we doing? And just now you did mention that the two isolated population are with the Yuming-Ha and sorry,
Look,
another, yeah.
Umi
So
Club, yeah.
yeah. So what will be the overall status of Hairy-Nosed Otters in Vietnam?
Go ahead, Quyên.
Yeah, so so Hairy-Nosed Otter in Vietnam, we only record like two populations in Umi Club and Umi Ha. Until now, we not sure if there are any other population in other sites on over the country, and and also like Hairy-Nosed Otter were received the high protection in the law of Vietnam, so they were listed in the Red Book of Vietnam, like very critical endangered, and also they were protected by some degree in Vietnam, that like if they were trade or hunting or eating, the people can be sent to jail. So yeah, they will say the highest protection in Vietnam, but I think most of the threats going from like a lot of their habitat were lost during the conversion of land use. So before, like a lot of wetland in the South Vietnam, but nowadays it's more like agriculture land. And like the two sides that we detected them is it's very like small patch of big swamp, and like we used to say like it's like this like the terrestrial islands there, because like it was surrounded by a lot of agricultural activity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to get some understanding as well, but in Vietnam, peat swamp forests are not just that two sites, but there are other peat swamp area, and probably there are also Hairy-Nosed Otters in these other sites. It's just that there are
possibly,
there are not many surveys that has been done, which is the same case in Malaysia. Not many survey has been done on the otters around Malaysia. But probably what we you think are the reasons that contribute to so little research and knowledge about the Hairy-Nosed Otters? Like, because they are not to say they're considered a very characteristic species when we compare to so many other species like huge carnivore. But why is it so little research being done on this particular species?
So just like you said, because there is so little protected areas, and because there's so little areas where people actually conduct the research. So typically in any country where there's protected areas, that's where most of the environmental and wildlife research goes into, because it's like the areas where wildlife is most valued or considered to have the most biodiversity value. So in the southern 16 provinces of Vietnam, there is less protected areas than the rest of the country. There's only these two in both Cà Mau and Quy Nhang. And then there is maybe one, I think, on the very, very south of Vietnam, but there's not much protected lands in the south. And being that this is the ecosystem that they mostly occur in, there's simply just no research there. These ones have had camera trapping, but the other ones that exist in the south have had no means to detect them, no initiatives to engage the public in recording them. And typically it's not seen as like a priority species. Otters in general are not seen as a priority species. Although the legal framework is there and there are very, very high protections, that's mostly due to NGO intervention in saying, okay, well, these animals are going missing. We need to protect them at the highest level now. But it's not primarily due to research. So I would say it's because of the lack of protected areas. That's the primary reason for the lack of research.
Well, great. That will be touched more about the protected area. So do you think that Hairy-Nosed Otter can be a flagship species of the peat swamp forest?
For me, the flagship species concept in this context is not, I don't think is the appropriate thing to direct conservation to peat swamp forests. I believe that having the hairy-nosed otter as like a peat swamp specialist, for example, would be a great thing to raise awareness for the animal and maybe even get funding and conservation actions directed towards it so it prevents it from extinction. But in the ecosystems where it occurs, again, like the lack of protections and the lack of connectivity and the lack of corridors, especially due to the intensive agricultural land sprawl over the last few decades, that needs to be something that's addressed on a landscape scale. That's something that needs to be addressed with all species that occur in the landscape, because they're all threatened by the same thing, essentially. I can't speak to their entire range, and maybe having a flagship species as the hairy-nosed otter would be something that would directly protect them and their sites. But here, I don't know that it would be the way to direct conservation actions.
Yeah, right. Nguyen, do you have any additional points that to be add into that?
Yeah, for me, it's like over the range of Hairy-Nosed Otter. Let's speak of our two sides. So we have Hairy-Nosed Otter there and Asian small claw otter. Both are like the high protection species in our country. Yeah, I think they can receive more. They need to receive more attention and more funding to study and to protect them. Yeah, but I'm not so sure also about the flagship species either. Yeah, so historically, in U Minh, so before that, U Minh Thượng and U Minh Hạ is one forest. They were connected by the forest, and they are very huge forest before. And there used to be tiger like living there. But right now it's no longer be the case when it was so small and it was surrounded by the settlement. So I think maybe like Hairy-Nosed Otter can stand out to be flagship, why? Because like other species also like all go when extinct in those sites. So I think maybe.
Yeah, but we'll probably will dig deeper into the two sites that you have mentioned, which is very interesting, and also that probably you can shed some light on some of the interesting hairy-nosed otter findings that from your side through the camera trap.
Yeah. Also, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So the two sites, U Minh Thượng and U Minh Hạ, they're essentially, as I mentioned, like the Melaleuca core area in the forest, and then surrounded by the peat swamp ecosystem. So they have the very diverse wetland flora, wetland fauna, and they historically had a lot more than they do now. So back in 2002, I think it was, before U Minh Thượng was designated as a national park, there was a very large fire. So the fire wiped out most of the forest area in that space, and they designated, I think, a year after the big fire, or maybe less time than a year, to protect the remaining forest and allow some restoration to happen there. But once the area was protected, all of the land around it was essentially, in both sites, I mean, U Minh Thượng and U Minh Hạ, both sites were completely surrounded by agriculture and aquaculture, and primarily by fish farms. So the issue with this then becomes, most of the piscivorous species, like otters, they're prone to human-wildlife conflict. So they have this small habitat patch that's essentially their prison now. They are a terrestrial island that is surrounded by resources that are available to them, but at the risk of dangerous interactions with humans. So in both sites, there's no connectivity anymore. And in both sites, they're prone to fires now. There has been land dredging. There has been modifications of the wetland ecosystems. And essentially, without any of these means of dispersal, there's no other means for them to repopulate or recover if something happens, like a giant fire again. So both sites, while we do work to protect them from poaching, for example, from exploitation, they still have a lot more external threats.
Right. But what would be the probably pressing conservation issue that need to be addressed in these two sites?
Land connectivity, For sure. That is the number one threat to both sites, because there is no corridor connectivity in the south right now between any of the protected areas. So, and also the massive scale of land conversion. As I'm sure you know, peat swamp forest and peat in general is like gold for agriculture. It grows things very, very fast. So of course, all of the land is used as fruiting agriculture, as rice agriculture. But then because it's also primarily wetland, it's very easy for aquaculture, ponds, fish farms, things like that, and shrimp farms. And with the kind of globalization of the fish export trade and shrimp export trade in Vietnam, most of this land has been converted. And because there's no other protections, it's unlikely that it will go back to its former natural state, right? So even if the land was converted back to protected areas and a corridor is created, we're not sure that it's possible to even restore what used to be there, right? Because it's now all unnatural habitat, it's converted habitat. So other than, of course, research on the hairy-nosed otter and just species conservation and site protection where they do still occur, for sustainability and longevity, there needs to be corridor connectivity between the sites.
Yeah, with the previous panelists, we did also touch up a very important point is once the peat swamp has been cleared, actually the ecosystem is gone. Basically, it's almost impossible to really restore back the peat, especially the peat swamp ecosystem, which is very important. Yeah, so that's the point.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
we could talk more about your research about the Hairy-Nosed otters in these two sites. Just as you mentioned, you use a lot of research techniques in doing research on all the species that you focus on. So currently, are you just using the camera trap to study the Hairy-Nosed otters?
So we do use targeted camera traps. For both sites, we've targeted primarily sites where there are more likely to have detections of otters, fishing cat, or wild cats in general, and pangolins. So we do use other research methods such as radio telemetry and drones, but that's primarily directed towards pangolins. The issue with otters, like even if we do release otters there, like they're very difficult to track with radio telemetry. You have to use surgical implants, which is not something that we want to do because it's too invasive. And just in general, there's not a lot of ability to make intensive research in these sites. There's not a lot of buy-in right now. So that's something that we're working on in the future and why we are getting involved in these sites, to get the buy-in to kind of put them on the map and make sure that we have the resources that we need allocated and say, okay, well, these might be the last remaining populations of these species. We should try to do more. But yes, at the moment, camera trapping and community surveys are what we've done.
Yeah, and we just a little bit about the sighting. So we went to some place that people reported to see hairy-nosed otter before, and we do the translate survey to go there and to look for them. So I think we succeed one or twice when we observe the hairy-nosed otter in the wild. But yeah, rather than the direct sighting or like direct observation and camera trap, we still haven't found any other way to study them.
Right. But probably, what would you aim to get from this data, this pool of data? Is it like absence presence, or is it calculating the estimation, population estimations? Yeah.
No, so the targeted camera traps were essentially just to map some of the distribution. Since they're targeted, you can't use occupancy models, for example. So because they're non-random, and there's not enough sites. So for these, we're essentially trying to detect as many as possible, trying to identify which groups are where, and then direct our anti-poaching efforts towards those sites so that they're well protected. So if anybody goes and sets fish traps or snare traps or anything there, then they can get removed immediately. Any offenders can get arrested. And generally to keep people from avoiding that site, we just recently published a paper showing the the temporal overlap that is really, really highest in hairy-nosed otters and humans and even the domestic dogs. And in the South, actually, the domestic dogs are one of the primary forms of hunting. So this is kind of one of those concerning things where their temporal overlap and their spatial overlap is so great with the hairy-nosed otters that we need people on the ground for law enforcement and anti-poaching intervention. We do have a thermal drone now that we've been using for some elephant projects, and we've been considering the possibilities of using them for otter population monitoring. That might be something that we do in the future, but we still need to do some pilot studies and make sure that while they're in the water, you can actually detect their thermal signature and kind of get a gist of when systematic surveys should occur, whether they're at night, whether they're in the morning or during the daytime. But that's future work. Hopefully that will happen.
Yeah, sounds very exciting. Sounds yeah, we could really use a lot of technology now to really advance the study of all these otter species, especially on these elusive hairy-nosed otters. Well, we are getting nearing to the end of our sections, and probably just a few two more questions here. Yeah, well, we would like to ask, what are the steps that you think needs to be taken to start this initiative in promoting the hairy-nosed otter as a species of focus in terms of habitat conservation? Well, links back to Peat Swamp as well. Yeah.
So I think as one of the remaining populations in the country, that should be one of the big focus if they are considered a flagship species of peat swamp forests. So there's multiple peat swamp forests, but there's only a few of the peat swamp forest sites that are protected that actually have these species occurring in them. So that kind of provides some urgency. That means that if these areas have some problem, if they have a massive fire again, if they have a massive storm or a flood, if they have a disease outbreak or some single cataclysmic event, it's possible that these populations can get wiped out just in that event because they have nowhere else to go. There's no corridor connectivity between the sites, and there's nowhere for them to outwardly disperse. So I think that would, if they were to be made a flagship of this ecosystem, that would be the primary thing, to say that there's nowhere else for them to go. And they're the last ones left.
Yeah, I think the first step for us is like we want to estimate the population of in those two sites, and also like Rosso says, like because it has a high risk of fire in this one area. I think we can consider to, you know, like maybe if the population in those two sites is good, we can consider to like relocate them to other this swamp area as well. So like make more chance of them to survive in more places.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that is some things that steps that probably we could always discuss and see whether we could have a collaboration on starting this kind of initiative, you know. So yes, I think this is our end of our sections, and you know, you have any take-home message for the participants?
For hairy-nosed otters or for the landscapes that they occur in?
For both. Yeah, because we always thought of, you know, linking back the species and the habitats. It always works together. It's an ecosystem. Yeah, so that's what, yeah.
So for me, I think everybody's talking about like things on a global scale and on a large scale, the global biodiversity framework, the 30 by 30 initiative, all of these big international agreements, and focusing on how we're going to protect more of these lands. But there's not enough focus on what lands we should protect and why they're valuable and how they're going to sustain their value for biodiversity in the future. So I think as we've been kind of repetitively saying, the connectivity is really the big issue. With no land connectivity, with no ecosystem connectivity within this ecoregion in Vietnam, there's one event could wipe out. It's not impossible for that to happen. So there needs to be some kind of fail-safe. We can throw as much funding as we can at research. We can throw as much funding as we can at anti-poaching and protecting them in the sites that they live in. but without any longevity and sustainable way for them to recover their populations and to disperse further in the future, there's not a lot of hope. That sounds kind of bad, so I don't want to leave it on that note. I think what I mean to say is that we need to start more initiatives for landscape connectivity with biodiversity corridors, and think a little bit more thoroughly on what areas should be protected and why we're doing that, rather than gazetting just certain areas that don't have people inhabiting them at the moment and saying, okay, well, let's throw that protected boundary on that, right? So that would be for me.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. How about
Yeah, so I think we still don't really fully understand the role of Hairy-Nosed Otter in the Bisquam ecosystem yet. So for me, if we understand more about them, like their habitat, their behavior, and we can have more like approaches to how to address the problem. So yeah, I think more research on Hairy-Nosed Otter needs to be conducted in the future, if possible.
Yeah, definitely. I agree on that. We really need to get more research to be done, but of course, we need to get more people on board as well. We need to get more young people, young generation of people, to get on board with us to do the research, more manpower. So there goes. We have this. I think this is a perfect ending with all this take-home message, connectivity, and also more research to be done. I think this is exactly what we want for the Hairy-Nosed Otter. And hopefully, of course, more collaboration in terms of transboundary collaboration between all the Hairy-Nosed Otter range country like Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar. The more people we have in the group, the more powerful we are. So thank you so much, Russell and Huyen from Safe Vietnam Wildlife, giving a lot of information, insights of the Hairy-Nosed Otter and the habitats in Vietnam. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, we have Daniel joining with us now. Daniel, do you want to say something about Hairy-Nosed Otter?
Yes, hi Daniel.
Okay, so we have. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to speak. So I share an office with people, so I can't. Hang on, bear with me 2 minutes.
No worries, Daniel. No worries.